Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Tuesday, January 10th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 235 days, the game against Michigan in 319 days. We're in the middle of a period of change for Ohio State and really, frankly, most of the rest of the sport of college football between the transfer portal, NFL draft declarations, coaching staff changes, recruiting. This is the crazy and busy season for the sport. My guest today had some thoughts on those potential coaching changes, as well as the issues with Ohio State's defense and a whole lot of other things. He is Marcus Hartnett of the Dayton Daily News. His piece, 10 Thoughts on the College Football Playoff Results for Ohio State and Michigan, had some really interesting things in there that I wanted to discuss with him. So, Marcus, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, I guess let's start with the defense. And, I think you summed it up pretty well. You have had some interesting stats on the Ohio State defense on yards per play allowed in the last couple games and that kind of stuff. But I think you really summed it up well with your subject, your section header for this one section, which just said, "What can you say about the defense at this point?" And boy, I think Ohio State fans are picking up what you're putting down there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it does help to have a little bit of time and think about what the expectations really should have been. I think they exceeded the expectations through the first 3 quarters of the year because they didn't play any offenses that were any good at all, except Penn State, who had a lot of success against them. And you could write off the last drive was a garbage time drive, but nonetheless. So the fact that it wasn't fixed shouldn't be that much of a shock, because we probably always should have felt that it was going to take more than a year to fix it. So, some of that improvement was a little bit of mirage, and it seems like a disaster because of the way the last 2 games went. But, in the grand scheme of things, I don't necessarily think that it's a disaster, other than, just actually losing those games, which obviously you didn't want to do. I don't think it would necessarily dissuade me from thinking they can turn things around. I know I've heard, people who are, obviously there's regular fans that have jumped ship on Knowles already, and then there's even a few, I think, people who are a little closer to the program, who are a little, not within the program, but a little closer to the program, who are very skeptical as well. But I think, again, like I said, I think you get down to the fact, last year in November, I wrote that, 10 years of having a scheme that is pretty basic and completely dependent on having not just good, but great players, like first-round players, hasn't worked. So maybe it's best to try something else. What if they run an actual defense that might work at least decently, even if the players are just okay? And so that was before I knew anything about Jim Knowles. And so that's exactly what Knowles is. And theoretically, he's maybe the best available guy for that. I mean, I also like the Dave Aranda tree style of defense, which has some similarities, but so I mean, not to go off on a tangent, but I mean, that's sort of like, I guess in the grand scheme of things, you can see that there are still problems. Since now you've had some of the same players asked to do some somewhat different things under different instruction, and they've still struggled. While some players got better, I think, I do think that it's a little bit more of maybe a personnel issue than anything for this year, but also it was always going to take some time for everything to get installed on the Knowles end of things.
Yeah, and I think there's always that question of is it personnel, is it scheme, is it coaching, is it execution? What is the issue? And the answer is always some combination of all of the above. But this being the first year, you don't necessarily have the personnel to do exactly what you want to do. He's working with better personnel than he has at any other stop in his career, but he doesn't have exactly the guys he wants for exactly the roles that he's looking for. So, yeah, I think a little patience is not a bad thing. And, there have been people, and, some people who are not just random egg avatar guy with 9 numbers in his Twitter handle and 3 followers, who are saying, kind of like out on the Jim Knowles thing. And that seems a little nuts to me, because, you look at his trajectory at Oklahoma State, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but, yards per play allowed per season, they went like 88, 50 something, 33, and then 6. So they were 31st, 32nd, something like that this year at Ohio State. It feels like when you look at that trajectory, this may just be something where it's going to take a little time to get up to speed in terms of personnel, but also in terms of installation of the defense and all the different schemes they want to put in there. It feels to me like you've got to give him more time. I don't think there's any reason to think that Ryan Day is not planning to, but that has seemed to me just a little bit early to be, even thinking about that kind of a change.
Yeah, and I mean, they definitely improved. I mean, the structure was just better. Look at the linebackers went from like a liability to a strength. And the thing that I thought was a little bit odd was just, I mean, really most of the problems were probably a result of just maybe pushing the wrong button a time or two here. And I think Knowles' answer would be, well, I kind of it's all baked in. Like, we've got to take some risks to get that will increase the overall success rate. And maybe that's true. It's kind of hard to say. I did look at, I don't have it in front of me now. I looked at the advanced numbers, like they got better by success rate as well. I might have it here. They got better by success rate, and I don't remember if the overall for the year explosion got a lot worse or not. I'd have to look at it. Sorry, I'm just, but I just know that I wrote it down. Yeah, the defensive success rate went from, and all downs went from 42% down to 34%, which is a pretty significant change. And it changed against both the rush and the pass. But I guess I didn't write down the explosiveness number, but obviously the yards per game went down and the yards per play went down slightly, 5.3 to 5.2. So it's fair to say, if you take out about 10 plays, the rest of the year they were much, much better. Now those plays count, so that isn't how it works. But you'd rather be good for 95% of the plays than only 60% of the plays or whatever. From that standpoint, and that's still, these are what the numbers are, even knowing what all these limitations that we're talking are. So it's sometimes you could be like Iowa's offense, where like you've got all your limitations and you literally couldn't be worse statistically. I guess that's the difference. Like the Ohio State's defense is more, well, not great, but still kind of decent, which is a lot of times what you're talking about with any Power 5 team, any unit that is disappointing. They're still probably at least not bad most of the time. And they're not just bottoming out. Whereas, I think that's another way to look at it. But like you say, it's going to take time to put things in. It's going to take time for him to figure out the personnel. I think it's very fair to say, well, here and there, he asked some guys to do things that they couldn't do. And that was really where things went wrong. Because without a doubt, I mean, 3 or 4 plays, if Ransom doesn't follow down against Georgia, if they don't miss a tackle, blow a couple covers against Michigan, I mean, they're probably going to win the national championship. And like I said, all the plays count, but it still is what it is. It's like the Michigan, people have been, the 1996 Michigan game, what if the one play decided that game, And so it is what it is. And should those guys have been able to accomplish what they were asked to do on those plays, I think that's an open debate. And Knowles has been adamant, he never wavers on, even if a guy individually makes a mistake, it's his fault for putting him in that position, basically. After years and years of hearing that, maybe it's not going to, but I think it definitely counts in the short term. And I do think that the players buy into that. I mean, he says it, and I get the impression from them that they buy into it, which is obviously the most important thing. So, there's kind of a holistic project that he's got going on, that if you buy all that stuff from the way he talked about how things were at Oklahoma State and how the players talked about him, and I think he's getting that from some of these guys they've got here too. And like I said, the other thing is just continuity. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, one of my big things with college football now is the lack of continuity. I understand that how things work in general, but the churn is still even 50% more than I think what people should probably tolerate. And part of it is a little bit of this and that with people getting promotions and all that. And when you change, if you change the defensive coordinator, then other positions change. But they need to get as much as they can. I think they need to have some more continuity. I did talk to Tim Walton briefly on Media Day about that, and he kind of, he said, yeah, it definitely helps when you've got more time for some of these things to sink in. I mean, you look at, again, Perry Eliano. I mean, the guy coached, 2 3-star recruits into like being the 2 best corners in the country the year before last. So, and the NFL thought that they were good too because they drafted, they took both of those guys, got taken in the top 3 rounds. So, I think these guys know what they're doing. I mean, Tim Walton's worked in the NFL for like 15 years. I think they know what they're doing. And it's also hard when these guys are working on just having different instruction every year. And not that it's drastically different, but still, it helps, I think, to have the same development over year, just especially when you talk about if it's just a play here or there, that's where the little things really add up too, I think. as far as that goes. So I think, they got to learn the personnel better. Knowles learning the personnel a little bit better. The guys just kind of developing, picking up skills here and there. I think that overall, you should probably feel okay about the future of it, even where you can legitimately say, well, XYZ was a mistake this year, but I think the good outweighed the bad. Plus, the other thing is, there's no good defenses anymore. There's tolerable defense and bad defense and really, really bad defense. There's no good defenses when you talk about if you're playing top 10 teams. It just doesn't exist anymore. So even almost one of the things when you look at the Michigan result was Michigan's offense was not that good, so they shouldn't have given up that many points. But the Georgia game, it's almost more just the fact that they, the sequence of everything that kind of made things a little more painful, because they actually did play well for a little while. It seemed like they had them on their heels a couple of times, and then they still managed to, kind of give it up. But giving up 41 points to Georgia wasn't even too much of a shock. If you had said this, if that was more of just a back and forth score fest, you'd been like, well, okay, whatever. But the fact that they actually kind of got a hold of them for a little while and then let them go almost made it worse. Especially, again, the one play. The one big play that you just couldn't have was that where the guy falls down, where Ransom falls down, and I think that's a questionable call because I'm not so sure that he can do that. And so I don't know why you had. I think he's a deep guy all along. When he signed, he said the coaches that recruited him said, yeah, he's a deep guy, and he said, oh yeah, I'm a deep guy. And the news staff said, oh yeah, I think he's best playing deep. And then they still put him in the box like repeatedly, and he would struggle with it. So that I also don't get from that standpoint. But at the end of the day, if they don't give up that play, they probably win. So again, there's you'd rather be in that situation than the opposite because it's easier, I think, to fix some of those things. But again, there's no lockdown defense. They're not going to allow 9 points a game, and even if they did, they would still give up a lot of points against anybody they're going to run into at the end of the season.
Yeah, and with Ohio State's offense being what it is, you don't need to have 2011 Alabama's defense. You can, no one is running 2011 Alabama's defense either scheme-wise or results-wise at this point. The sport has changed a lot since then, but it does. Yeah, they don't need to have an absolute lockdown defense. They just need to have a pretty good defense, and that would probably be enough. And one thing that might help, as you said, is the continuity in terms of coaching and continuity also in terms of players. You had a great tweet a couple days ago. Ohio State signed 17 players listed as defensive backs from 2018 to 21. 10 of the 17 have transferred out. 5 have become starters so far, and then two members of that group are also among the transfers. So. Yeah, you've just had a lot of churn on the coaching staff. You have a lot of churn in in that secondary and, on the roster. And that does eventually catch up with you. A little continuity would be good to have have some of those folks back and get a second year with, okay, now they have seen Lathan Ransom try and play in a couple different spots. Where is he best? Well, now they probably have a better grasp on that. So that certainly would help, you would think. Last thing before I let you go, going to take a little bit of a turn here. This feels like this is just going to be the fun question I ask everyone until this whole thing is settled. So, Marcus, where's Jim Harbaugh going to be coaching this fall? Because I know where he says he's going to enthusiastically be trying to coach this fall, but his actions vis-a-vis the NFL continue to suggest that his enthusiasm may not lay in Ann Arbor right now.
I don't know. What are the odds? Obviously, if he gets offered a job, he's going to take it because that was reported by reputable people on the college side of things, and he hasn't done anything whatsoever to make that not seem true. So the biggest question is just if he gets offered a job. And what's interesting is the Colts. As far as we know, the Colts have not entered the chat yet, and that still seems like a big time opportunity for him from a variety of standpoints. So. If you absolutely made me say, I think I'll end up at Michigan because he just won't get a better option, much like last year. But maybe he learned from last year he wasn't out there quite enough, and maybe if he pushes the envelope a little bit more, he will end up getting that offer. But you never know because obviously Harbaugh being a little bit of a strange bird, that how that goes in interviews and things like that. So any team that has options. Are they just always going to go, well, if it's 50-50, does that decide it, who they want? They say, well, let's go with the slightly more normal person there. Because obviously you look at from the reports, the Broncos are also going to interview Sean Payton. So they're not doing that just for the heck of it, because there's even some hoops they'd have to jump through to get him. Now, maybe that could be, even if they wanted him, they wouldn't want to jump through the hoops. But obviously he's not like the front runner for this Broncos job, which it was reported today he's actually going to interview for. But again, there's still going to be some other jobs out there. Plus, there'll probably be a couple of surprise firings in the next 24 hours. And maybe not surprise, but just people who haven't been fired yet who are on the cusp. There was a report. I'm not sure exactly how legitimate it was, but even that the Dolphins may move on from their guy within 1 year, which seems insane to me. But also then I saw someone point out, well, that's always been a lot of talk about Harbaugh and the Dolphins because the owner is a Michigan guy, which then that gets spun. People spin that, well, he wouldn't want to hurt Michigan by hiring, but if Harbaugh wants to leave, I'm sure he's more than happy to take him. So, there's a lot of variables here. I think there's no question. In the past, whenever the reports were always NFL reporters saying, oh, well, people might be interested in Harbaugh, I always take that with a grain of salt at best. Like probably even think, well, that's almost certainly just, I guess they would be interested, but that doesn't mean anything. And I would have assumed, I'm a sucker for sentiment, so I would have assumed that Harbaugh actually is happy in Michigan and would just as soon stay there unless somebody offered him, the entire franchise or something like that. But that's obvious. We know for sure that's not true anymore because it'd be very easy for him not to be going through all this stuff every year. And maybe it is just a matter of he wants a raise, but I think there's way more than that. It's not like he's still making $4 million. I mean, he's right up there in the upper echelon of coaches from that standpoint. So I guess, again, the way I would sum it up is it kind of sounds like if he gets the chance, he'll leave, which has been reported and seems very believable. But I don't know. I feel like the odds are less than it's more likely he does not get a chance than that he does. So he'll probably still be at Michigan next year.
Yeah, and I do feel like the media Kremlinology piece of that, where if it's college football reporters reporting it, that generally means it's coming from Jim Harbaugh or someone very close to Jim Harbaugh. He actually has an agent or has someone sort of working as his agent now, which is not something he has had in previous years, which kind of indicates to me also that he's really seriously looking at this, and this is not just sort of an on a whim thing. So, yeah, that'll be a fascinating thing to continue watching play out. Yeah, as we are recording this, NFL Black Monday has not officially wrapped up yet, so there's probably more heads to hit the chopping block before all is said and done on Monday. So we will have, don't worry, we'll keep talking Jim Harbaugh, we'll keep talking Ohio State football, we'll keep talking transfer portal and recruiting and coaching carousel and all that fun stuff at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And Marcus will, of course, keep doing it at the Dayton Daily News. I'll put a link to his that column that inspired this whole thing in the post at BuckeyeHuddle.com. But Marcus, let people know where they can find you on Twitter as well. Yeah, just Marcus Hartman on Twitter, and I do have a Facebook page if you feel like following that way. You can get the and it's just Marcus Hartman DDN, I believe, is what if you want to follow along there, you can get all the links to everything. But those would be the best two things to do. And I was going to say, some of the things that I was thinking were reinforced by the X's and O's story that you guys had about the defense, kind of where things went wrong. That sort of pointed out some of the adjustments that they made coverage wise. There were some things where Georgia got him, but a lot of times it was player X was really not where he was supposed to be. The coverage was the call was probably okay, but this guy wasn't there when he needed to be there. And so again, Knowles says, well, it's up to me if a guy doesn't do it right in the game, it's because, I asked him to do something that he couldn't do. And I think that there's a lot of validity to that when you look at some of, Ronnie Hickman was a guy who got pointed out a couple of times. Well, Ronnie Hickman's success last year was playing in the box. So, and he's really a little bit more linebacker-ish type thing. I think that they miscast him. I think they kind of have the safeties backwards because both of them struggled kind of in the opposite role of what we sort of might have thought they were best at coming into the year. And I also think Lathan Ransom, I wouldn't throw him out with the bathwater either because he had a lot of good moments and he's still, like 12 months and 2 weeks away from like a horrible leg injury. So didn't have spring practice. So, I think he'll get better. I think you get good vibes from talking to a guy like him. he cares about it and seems like an intelligent guy. So I would think that he can improve. Mike Doss, one of the most famous plays of his career was giving up the Big Ten losing touchdown to Purdue when he was a sophomore, and he came back and was one of the best, 3-time All-American and all that. So I wouldn't write off some of these guys that are younger guys either. But I do think that there are some older guys who maybe it is kind of time to see what else somebody else can do from the lower classes. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff like that to watch during spring ball this year as they sort of, once the roster stuff sorts itself out, and they know who they've got and where they could slot some guys in. It'll be interesting to see how they shuffle some guys around in the secondary and a couple other spots. Offensive line is going to be pretty interesting to see, depending on who they end up bringing in the transfer portal, if anyone, who they end up keeping, all that. So it'll be a lot of fun stuff to talk about all spring as we head into sort of the transfer portal season of college football, but then head into spring ball as well. So thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.